Hi Stuart, lovely to meet up with you once again and do some further work on your swing. Relatively straightforward lesson in the sense that we were struggling initially with sort of making correct contact. We're getting a little bit thin with the shots, maybe occasionally hitting the ground behind the ball. One of the things we talked about was the location of the body weight. Setup P1 here was sort of 50-50ish, maybe a touch forward with the upper centre, but certainly don't give the impression that there's any real sort of weight forward at setup. So what we talked about is using the location of the body weight to suit the circumstances. So if you're struggling with compression, you're struggling with your strike, don't be frightened of putting a little bit more weight forward. We use the idea or the image of being on a slight downslope, and that's going to move the low point forward and give you some sort of descent into the back of the golf ball. The other thing we talked about was with the swing itself. As you were coming into impact, pretty tidy backswing, through the balls, a lot of standing up going on. So the head coming up very quickly. One of the things we noticed with players like Charlie Wee from down the line is that they maintain their inclination to the ground very well. That's just not a stack and tilt thing. That's pretty much indicative of all good ball strikers. Being able to maintain the inclination to the ground through the hip is a result of your hips turning, extending and sliding. So if we look at Charlie Wee when the arms are becoming visible, so the right arm is just past parallel in the through swing. He's maxed out the rotation of the hips, the belt buckle's pointing pretty much towards his target. He's also tucking the hips under, and that extension would be in the same direction as we see. Remember, the tucking of the hips is always sort of at 90 degrees, or in the same direction should I say, as to where the belt buckle points. And what Charlie's also done is maxed out the amount of hip slide. So a player who maintains his inclination to the ground must have hips that are continuously turning, extending and sliding. And one of the things that club golfers find particularly difficult is to focus heavily on the sliding of the hips, because unfortunately when they do that it becomes a little bit of a thrust, sort of pretty much predominantly towards the target. They don't really consider the sliding of the hips in relation to the rotation of the hips, so it becomes a little bit too much of a slide, and as a result we get a little bit dropping back with the head. So you can see there that the hips aren't sliding through continuously and therefore offsetting the extension. So what we asked you to do was, if we look at players who max out the hip slide, they have more right tilt in the finish. Remember, you're facing your target, so right tilt now is towards the golf ball in this direction, and that right tilt is put in by the continuous sliding of the hips. So if the hips continue to slide, you maintain your inclination to the ground and have the maximum amount of right tilt. And if you flip that on its head, if you focus on maintaining or trying to create as much right tilt as you can through the hip, that means that your hip slide must be continuous. Now obviously we've got to learn to do that, we've got to get more familiar with doing that and have it become more incremental. And we can see there that your hips are clearly turning. The head is not coming up as fast as it was at the start of the session, and the reason for that is because the hips have continued to slide, allowing you to maintain your right tilt. Like I said, a little bit of chicken and egg. The player who maintains the right tilt must be sliding the hips, and the player who slides the hips must maintain the right tilt. I just think in my experience it's much easier for a player to consider or to focus on maxing out the right tilt upon completing the swing than it is to try and feel that continuous hip slide, simply because this continuous hip slide is always changing orientation. It's sometimes it's towards the target, other times it's to the left. If you see Charlie Wee there in the finish, more to his left. So the hip slide is always changing orientation, whereas the right tilt is a feel, a destination that you can swing to during the finish and try and repeat that out on the course and when you practice. Good luck with it. I look forward to working with you again in a few weeks' time. Well done.